Tune into Nice Radio every Saturday at 7:30 a.m. for A View from the Outside, hosted by Brereton Horne. A View from the Outside takes a look at key issues affecting St Vincent and the Grenadines and gives a global perspective on how these issues are viewed. Host Brereton Horne will examine a variety of topics to enlighten, stimulate debate, and explore solutions. Hear the facts, hear the real-life stories, hear A View from the Outside. Join Brereton Horne at 7:30 a.m. every Saturday on Nice Radio for A View from the Outside.
This society needs a spectacle. It might help us to see some people.
On A View from the Outside this week being the 26th of September 2020, we look at contempt, C-O-N-T-E-M-P-T, contempt, with the view being that the time has come for all of us as Vincentians, at home in St Vincent and the Grenadines and in the Vincentian diaspora, to reject the contempt with which we are being treated, particularly by the Prime Minister, his agents and enablers. And for us, the time has come for us to uplift ourselves and our fellow men and women as we strive to ensure a better St Vincent and the Grenadines for all of us. The Collins Dictionary states that if you have contempt for someone or something, you have no respect for them, or you think that they are unimportant. That definition tells us that contempt involves having a feeling of disrespect for others. Contempt involves actually disrespecting others. Contempt involves thinking and treating someone as if they are unimportant. In an online article dated the 27th of December 2018 in Psychology Today, Dr. Brereton, who has a degree in neuroscience and a doctorate in philosophy, stated that the unique action tendency of a person who exhibits contempt is to ignore, exclude, or denigrate the person who is the target of their contempt. And then further stated that contempt is usually combined with a feeling of disgust. And the renowned American psychologist Paul Ekman said that it is widely believed that the function of contempt is to signal a feeling of superiority, of not needing to accommodate or engage, and to assert power or status. It is with that definition and the other information in mind, and especially taking into consideration the utterances of the leader of the regime in St Vincent and the Grenadines, as well as some of his agents and enablers, why we here on A View from the Outside think it necessary to encourage you, our fellow Vincentians, to reject the continued contempt with which we have been treated. In that regard, we say that those who have been paying attention cannot miss the insult. You cannot miss their contempt for the people. In fact, we go one step further and say, even if you have not been paying attention, you still cannot miss the insults. You cannot miss their contempt. And for those of you, whether you live at home in St Vincent and the Grenadines, or you live in the Vincentian diaspora, who think that you are insulated or protected from their contempt, then we urge you to pause and reflect for a moment. Have a think. If they can be so insulting, so contemptuous of others, your own fellow men and women, especially those who are perceived to oppose him and his regime or not to support him and his regime, then you yourself are simply not immune. The evidence shows that even those who are once his most ardent supporters, who dared to oppose him or his regime, or who do not actively support him or his regime, have had personal experience of their contempt. You may be next. you are not immune. Those of you who think you are. No one is immune, no matter how much you think you are. So when we talk about contempt for Vincentians, what really are we talking about? Mostly everyone will remember when in the early stages of the regime coming into power in the country, the head of the regime used one of the rudest gestures ever when in the glare of the public in Kingstown, the capital of the country, he stuck up his middle finger to those whom he saw as detractors. Later, in the face of public outcry, instead of having provided an apology, he described the act as him having the perfect middle finger. Contempt? Matthew Thomas, a once ardent supporter of his, faced his ire and contempt when he publicly, on a political platform, called him a worthless dirty dog, meaning a worthless dirty dog. Bassi Alexander, a friend of everyone, was subjected to a similar treatment when he was referred to, again on a political platform, as a NDP dog. Those two respectable men who are held in high esteem by the vast majority of Vincentians were subjected to such contempt, all because of the perception, real or otherwise, that they support the opposition New Democratic Party, the NDP. Kingsley de Freitas and Rash John were on the airwaves on the state-owned radio, the National Broadcasting Corporation, snared with contempt when they were referred to as blight. Pathel Matthews, before he became the Honourable Representative in the House of Parliament for the constituency of North Leeward, was spoken of with contempt when he was referred to as a yam boy. The Honourable Arnim Eustace, the immediate past president of the NDP and the former leader of Her Majesty's opposition in the country, an honourable man in every way, was treated with contempt when he was repeatedly referred to as dotish, useless, and, being someone of African descent, was told that Bush, referring to George Bush, the then President of the United States of America, would not be able to recognize him in the darkest of night. What contempt! St Vincent and the Grenadines' population is predominantly comprised of people of African descent and have generally been treated with contempt over and over time, referred to, among other things, as lowest common denominator, untutored, unlearned, uncultured, malignant, hewers of wood and carriers of water, while at the same time being reminded that only a Portuguese, meaning only those of Portuguese descent, know how to get funds and know how to spend money. Doctors and nurses at the hospitals have been referred to as thieves. The farmers in the hills, the Rastafari, locally referred to as Rastas, have been called vagabonds and told that they will be pursued until they exist no more. Members of the media, with contempt, have been called chattering nabobs. Often, Vincentians have been reminded that the mouth is muzzled by the food it eats to live, a reminder which many believe is an attempt to silence those who benefit from the regime handsomely, very little or otherwise. What contempt for the Vincentian people! We have seen above where men have been treated with contempt and called the vilest of names. However, it must be noted that women also have not escaped the contempt. Vinette Frederick, a former senator with the opposition NDP, was referred to with contempt as a gadfly and her sexuality was questioned. Anisha Baptiste, a former senator, also with the opposition NDP, someone of African descent, had her hair texture questioned when, with contempt, she was referred to as a dry-haired girl. Susan Duncan, a poor but proud Vincentian woman, exercised her right of freedom of expression and of association, and joined the protests with the front line, who protested the results of the general elections of December 2015, which many believe was stolen and are still to be decided by the Court of Appeal. She was publicly humiliated with contempt, referred to in the House of Parliament of all places as indigent and poor and unable to afford her own lunch. Lizette King, a woman of utmost courage and once a supporter of the regime, who dared to show that she has an independent mind, has been treated with ongoing contempt and has been referred to, among other things, as being a vagrant. Other women are treated with contempt by agents and enablers of the regime when they regularly take to the airwaves to disparage and denigrate them. Yogi Farrell was treated with contempt when, without any evidence presented in court, where she appeared on charges of using insulting words to Karen Gonsalves, the wife of Camilo Gonsalves, she was committed to the mental institution. It is worth noting that all of this ensued after she alleged that she had an extramarital affair with Camilo Gonsalves, the son of the leader of the regime. The contempt for her, Yogi Farrell, is further inflamed when Camilo Gonsalves, who speaks vociferously and extensively on other matters, refused to speak on her matter. Even women of the regime have been treated with subtle contempt when the entire Vincentian public and the wider world were told that there are no women in the party of the caliber of Camilo Gonsalves, the man who many believe is groomed to succeed his father to fulfill the burgeoning dynasty. Vincentians were treated with contempt when the regime held what is commonly referred to as a rape rally, chaired by prominent women in the regime, in a twisted effort to show support for their head, who was accused of rape and sexual assault by a female member of his security detail, who at the time was guarding him and his family. Vincentians in the diaspora have not escaped the contempt either. Many who refuse to cower in the face of intimidation and attempts to try to prevent them from being critical of the regime are often referred to as internet crazies at a time when mental health is an issue of grave concern worldwide, an issue which the United Nations is leading the charge on in an effort to protect the vulnerable. They, those in the diaspora, have been told that they use the internet for commerce. Many, with contempt, have been referred to as babysitters and dog walkers, yet they are seen as the money tree to send remittances home to prop up a failing economy. Many have, with contempt, been told that they live hand to mouth and in cockroach-infested basements. We can go on and give many more examples of when Vincentians, both at home in St Vincent and the Grenadines and in the Vincentian diaspora, have been treated with contempt. However, time is limited, so we will leave it to you to continue to identify the examples and to continue the discussion. You may want to talk about when the leader of the regime treating every other Vincentian with contempt by telling us that no one else can lead the country but him. You may want to talk about how, with contempt, they refuse to release the latest country poverty assessment report, which is said to show a significant increase in poverty across the country. You may want to talk about how they show contempt for the Constitution, the highest law of the land, by not providing accountability to us as prescribed by the Constitution. You may want to talk about the contempt which they show when they refuse to have a motion of no confidence debated in the House of Parliament. You may want to talk about the contempt they have shown for court orders by not compensating citizens as ordered by the court. You may want to talk about the contempt for Vincentians when we were told that we could go to all the courts in the world, all the courts we want, but we have to come back to Papa, meaning the leader of the regime. You may want to talk about the contempt which was shown for the opposition parliamentarians when they were tossed out of Parliament down the stairs, leaving one parliamentarian with long-term injury. You may want to talk about the contempt which Simone Murray and her husband, Dr. Wayne Murray, have been treated by having their land compulsorily acquired, reportedly without any prior negotiations with them in relation to price and or demarcation of the exact property to be acquired. You may want to talk about the contempt they show to Vincentians at home when they fly out for the best healthcare in the world, while those at home have no choice but to be satisfied with the inadequacies which exist in the health system. And you may also want to talk about the subtle contempt to keep Vincentian poor with the pledge to increase the amount of poor relief or public assistance if Vincentians vote them back into government or into power, as they say. And of course, there is contempt by the members of the regime themselves, those who sat by and those who continue to sit by and allow all of this to happen and do nothing about it. That in itself is a contempt, or is contempt for the Vincentian people. Vincentians, it is clear that this is the time when we truly need a revolution of the mind. This is the time when we need to arm ourselves with the available evidence and information and reject the contempt. The upcoming general elections in St Vincent and the Grenadines will no doubt present the golden opportunity to take action. Therefore, we, on A View from the Outside, encourage every one of you to have due regard for the importance of that occasion. Ensure that you register to vote. Ensure that you go out and vote for a leader and a government which will no longer treat any of the Vincentian people with contempt. And as you do so, as we all do that, let us bear in mind the words of the late Polish-Swiss psychologist, psychoanalyst and philosopher Alice Miller, who said, and I quote, "Contempt is the weapon of the weak," unquote. The weak there is W-E-A-K. So I repeat that. Contempt is the weapon of the weak. Until next week, Randy and all of the listeners, this is Brereton Horne with A View from the Outside, with a reminder to send your feedback as usual to aviewfromtheoutside@hotmail.com. We also invite you to visit and like our Facebook page at A View from the Outside. And we also ask you to visit and subscribe to our YouTube channel at JMB Horne. Have a pleasant Saturday, everyone. Have a wonderful Sunday, and have a productive week ahead with everyone taking the necessary steps to reject the contempt. All the best to you, Randy, and the listeners.